The treaty scroll lay on the rough-hewn table like a death sentence, its wax seal already broken. The terms inked in languages, both human and orcish, stark against the parchment. Gabriel Owens read them 3 times before the meaning truly sank into his bones. One human bride or groom must cross the border and marry one orc, consummating a union that would bind their peoples in an uneasy peace after 30 years of bloodshed. The village hall of Milford had never been so silent. 200 souls packed into a space meant for half that number, farmers and craftsmen shoulder to shoulder with their wives and daughters, everyone understanding what this meant. Someone from their community would have to volunteer, or the village elders would draw lots. The alternative was unthinkable: another decade of raids, of burning fields and murdered children, of young men riding off to war and never returning. Gabriel stood near the back, his calloused hands tucked into the pockets of his worn jacket. At 32, he had already given 10 years to the war, serving as a scout on the borderlands until an arrow through the shoulder had sent him limping home. His father's farm was his now, the old man having died the previous winter, leaving Gabriel alone with 100 acres and memories that woke him screaming some nights. "This is madness," muttered Thomas beside him, a fellow veteran with scars crisscrossing his face. "They cannot seriously expect us to." "They can and they do," Gabriel said quietly. His eyes tracked across the crowd, landing on faces he had known his entire life. Mary Fletcher, barely 18, her hands trembling as she clutched her mother's arm. The widow Brennan with her 3 young children. The Marsh twins, sisters who ran the bakery their parents had built. Every woman here was either too young, too old, or had family depending on them. The village elder, a white-haired man named Cornelius, cleared his throat. "The treaty stipulates that we have 1 week to present our candidate at the border crossing. The orc clans have already selected their person." He stumbled over the words, unable to fully reconcile what he was asking. "I will not insult any of you by pretending this is anything but a terrible burden, but it is the price of peace." "Who did the orcs choose?" someone called out. "A warrior. Some brute who will make our girl's life a living hell." Cornelius consulted the document. "The name given is Kraska." No additional details were provided. A ripple of fear moved through the assembly. Everyone had heard the stories. Orcs were savages, brutal and uncivilized, barely more than animals. They ate their enemies' hearts, or so the tales went. They filed their tusks to points and painted themselves with the blood of their kills. Gabriel had fought enough of them to know some of it was exaggeration born of fear and propaganda. But he had also seen what orc raiders could do to an undefended farmstead. "I will not send my daughter to such a fate," a farmer named Hutchins declared, his arm protectively around a girl who could not have been more than 16. "I will take my family and flee west before I allow it, and bring war down upon the rest of us." Another man shot back. "The treaty is binding on all settlements within 50 miles of the border. If we break it, the fighting starts again." The argument escalated quickly, voices rising, accusations flying. Gabriel watched it all with a growing heaviness in his chest. He knew how this would end. They would draw lots eventually, and some poor soul would be sacrificed. Unless someone volunteered. His feet were moving before his mind fully caught up with the decision. Gabriel pushed through the crowd, ignoring Thomas's startled grab at his sleeve, and climbed the 3 steps to the platform where Cornelius stood. "I will go," Gabriel said, his voice cutting through the chaos. The hall fell silent so abruptly it felt like a physical thing. "I volunteer." Cornelius stared at him. "Gabriel, you do not have to. I am unmarried, with no children and no living parents. My farm can be worked by hired hands or sold to benefit the village coffers." He turned to face the crowd, seeing shock and relief and guilt painted across familiar faces. "I have already given a decade to this war. I can give this too. But the treaty specifies." Someone started, then trailed off uncertainly. "The treaty specifies one human must marry one orc," Gabriel said flatly. "It does not specify which. I assume the orcs will not object to receiving a husband rather than a wife." The silence stretched. Then Mary Fletcher's mother began to weep with relief, and that seemed to break whatever spell held the room. People rushed forward, some trying to thank him, others to talk him out of it, still others simply staring as if he had grown a second head. Gabriel let the noise wash over him. He felt strangely calm, as if he were watching himself from a great distance. This was just another mission, he told himself. Another dangerous assignment in service to his people. He had survived those before. The week that followed passed in a blur. Gabriel settled his affairs, signing over the farm to a cousin who had been working as a field hand on a larger estate. He packed a single bag with clothes, and a few personal items, a knife his father had given him, a small volume of poetry his mother had loved, a tintype portrait of his family taken when he was a boy. He did not know what he would be allowed to bring into his new life, but he wanted something of his old one. The night before he was to leave, Thomas came to the farmhouse with a bottle of whiskey. They sat on the porch, passing it back and forth as the sun set over fields Gabriel would never harvest. "You are either the bravest man I have ever known or the most foolish," Thomas said eventually. "Perhaps both." Gabriel took a long swallow, feeling the burn all the way down. "I keep thinking about all the people we lost. Marcus and his whole squad at the Red River crossing. Little Simon, who lied about his age to enlist and died in his first battle. Your brother." Thomas flinched but nodded. "James. If this marriage, this sacrifice can prevent more names being added to that list, then it is worth it." Gabriel stared out at the darkening sky. "And if I am honest, there was nothing keeping me here. The farm was my father's dream, not mine. Every night I close my eyes and see the faces of orcs I have killed, and I wonder if they had families, if someone mourned them the way we mourn our dead. You are too good for this world, my friend." "No," Gabriel said softly. "I am just tired of being part of the killing." The border crossing lay a day's ride north, marked by a line of ancient standing stones that predated both human and orc occupation of the region. Gabriel rode alone, despite several offers of escort. This was something he needed to do himself, without witnesses to his fear. He arrived at noon to find a delegation already waiting on the human side: Cornelius and 2 other village elders, plus a priest to perform the ceremony, and a scribe to record it for the official records. On the far side of the standing stones, a group of orcs stood in a loose cluster. Gabriel had seen orcs before, of course, usually across a battlefield or in the aftermath of a raid. But he had never been this close to so many while unarmed and at peace. They were massive, most of them a foot or more taller than even the largest human, with broad shoulders and thick muscles that spoke of immense strength. Their skin ranged from deep forest green to a lighter sage color, and every one of them bore tusks that protruded from their lower jaws. They wore leather and furs, with bone ornaments braided into long hair and weapons strapped to their backs and hips. One orc stood slightly apart from the rest. She was tall, though not as massive as some of the warriors, perhaps 6.5 feet, with a lean, athletic build that spoke of endurance rather than brute force. Her skin was a rich green like summer leaves, and her dark hair had been woven into an intricate series of braids that fell past her shoulders. Small tusks curved up from her lower jaw, and her pointed ears were pierced with simple wooden studs. She wore practical traveling clothes, a leather vest over a sturdy cloth shirt, leggings and boots built for hard miles. But what struck Gabriel most were her eyes, a startling amber color that caught the sunlight as she looked directly at him. This, then, was Kraska. The ceremony was mercifully brief. The priest seemed eager to get through it, stumbling over the words of binding as he glanced nervously at the orc delegation. Gabriel spoke his vows in a clear voice, promising to honor the terms of the treaty and to enter this marriage in good faith. When it came time for Kraska to respond, she spoke in Orcish, a language of harsh consonants and guttural sounds that Gabriel did not understand. But her voice was steady, and she met his eyes as she spoke. "She accepts the terms," rumbled one of the orc warriors, a gray-haired veteran with scars crisscrossing his green skin. "The marriage is recognized by the clans. Then, by the authority vested in me, I declare you bound in matrimony," the priest said quickly. May this union bring peace to our peoples." There was no kiss, no embrace, just Gabriel picking up his bag and walking across the invisible line marked by the standing stones. He felt the weight of every eye on him, human and orc alike, as he crossed from one world into another. Kraska studied him as he approached. Up close, he could see the faint pattern of old scars on her hands and forearms, the kind earned from hard work and harder living. She was beautiful in a way he had not expected, her features strong and proud, her bearing that of a warrior. "I am Gabriel," he said, uncertain of how else to begin. She nodded once. "Kraska." Her human speech was heavily accented but clear. "We go now." The orc delegation mounted up. They rode massive wolves that made Gabriel's horse look like a pony by comparison, and he was directed to follow. No one spoke to him as they traveled, though he caught several orcs glancing his way, their expressions ranging from curiosity to outright hostility. Kraska rode at the front of the group on a gray wolf with intelligent yellow eyes, never once looking back to see if he followed. They traveled north and east, leaving behind the settled farmlands and entering the contested borderlands. Here the war had left its mark: burned-out homesteads, fields gone to seed, forests that showed signs of old battles in the scorched earth, and broken weapons half buried in the dirt. Gabriel's shoulder ached, the old wound protesting the hours in the saddle. As the sun began to set, they made camp in a clearing near a stream. The orcs worked with practiced efficiency, building a fire and setting out supplies. Gabriel dismounted stiffly, seeing to his horse before approaching the fire. No one stopped him, but no one invited him to sit either. Kraska appeared beside him, holding out a wooden bowl filled with some kind of stew. "Eat," she said simply. "Thank you." Gabriel took the bowl, their fingers brushing for a moment. Her skin was warm, slightly rougher than his own. He tasted the stew cautiously and found it surprisingly good: meat and roots in a savory broth. She watched him eat for a moment, then asked, "Why did you come? The treaty required it." "Yes, but why you? You are warrior." She gestured to the way he moved, the scars visible on his neck and hands. "You have killed orcs." Gabriel set down his bowl. "I have, and orcs have killed humans I cared about, friends, brothers in arms." He met her amber eyes. "But I am tired of the killing. If my being here prevents more death on both sides, then it is worth it." Kraska was silent for a long moment. Then she said, "You volunteered. The clan elders told me this. You chose to come. Someone had to. Better it be someone who had already given years to the war than a young girl with her whole life ahead of her." Something shifted in her expression, though Gabriel could not quite read it. "You are brave, or very foolish." "I have been told both in recent days," he admitted. The ghost of something that might have been a smile touched her lips. "Come, I will show you where you sleep." She led him to the edge of the camp where a small tent had been erected, separate from the others. Inside was a bedroll, a few supplies, and not much else. "This is yours," Kraska said. "Tomorrow we reach the settlement where we will live. It is 3 days' ride still." "Will you tell me about it?" Gabriel asked. She hesitated, then nodded. "It is called Stone Creek. Small settlement, perhaps 40 families. We farm and hunt. It is quiet." She paused, seeming to choose her words carefully. "The clan elders chose this place because it is far from the main territories, far from those who would object to this marriage. Your people do not approve any more than mine did," Gabriel said quietly. "No, they see you as enemy. As monster who has killed our kin." Her eyes held his. "Just as your people see me." "I do not think you are a monster," Gabriel said. "You do not know me yet," Kraska replied. Then she turned and left him alone in the tent. Gabriel lay awake for a long time, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the orc camp voices speaking in a language he did not understand. The soft growls and huffs of the wolves, the crackle of the fire. He thought about the woman who was now his wife, bound to him by treaty and necessity if not by choice or affection. He thought about the life that stretched ahead of him, in a place where he would always be an outsider, married to someone who looked at him and saw an enemy. What had he done? The next 3 days of travel fell into a rhythm. They rode from dawn until dusk, stopping only briefly to water the animals and eat. The landscape grew more rugged, the gentle farmland giving way to rocky hills and dense forests. Gabriel's shoulder protested the long hours, and by the second evening he could barely lift his left arm. He tried to hide it, but Kraska noticed. She always seemed to be watching him, those amber eyes tracking his movements even when she appeared focused on other things. "You are hurt," she said that evening, approaching him as he struggled to unsaddle his horse. "An old wound. It troubles me sometimes," Gabriel said through gritted teeth. Without asking permission, Kraska took over unsaddling the horse, her strong hands making quick work of buckles and straps that Gabriel had been fumbling with. Then she pointed to a fallen log near the fire. "Sit," he obeyed, too tired to argue. She disappeared into one of the supply packs and returned with a small clay jar. "Take off your shirt." Gabriel hesitated, suddenly aware of the other orcs watching. But Kraska's expression brooked no argument, so he carefully pulled off his shirt, revealing the puckered scar on his left shoulder where an orcish arrow had punched through muscle and tendon 2 years ago. Kraska made a low sound in her throat that might have been sympathy or recognition. She opened the jar, releasing a pungent herbal smell, and scooped out a generous amount of greenish salve. Her hands were surprisingly gentle as she worked it into his shoulder, her strong fingers finding knots of tension and working them loose. "This will help," she said. "Old injuries remember pain. This helps them forget." The warmth of the salve seeped into his aching muscles, bringing relief for the first time in days. Gabriel closed his eyes, focusing on the sensation of her hands on his skin. It was strange, intimate in a way he had not expected. When was the last time someone had touched him with anything resembling care? "Thank you," he said softly. She grunted acknowledgement, finishing the massage and wiping her hands clean. "You should have said you were hurting." I did not want to slow the group down. "Foolish," she said, but without heat. "A warrior who hides injury becomes a liability." She studied the scar, her fingers ghosting over the damaged tissue. "This was from the battle at Twin Oaks, 3 summers ago." Gabriel's eyes snapped open. "How do you know that?" "The arrows were fletched with hawk feathers and dipped in poison made from ironwood bark. That is my clan's tradition." She met his gaze. "I was at Twin Oaks. I was one of the archers." The words hung between them like a blade. Gabriel stared at her, his mind racing. Twin Oaks had been a slaughter on both sides, a human supply convoy ambushed by orc raiders, the battle spilling into the nearby village. He had been part of the scout unit trying to protect the civilians. He remembered arrows falling like rain, remembered the screams of the dying, remembered the fever that had nearly killed him as the poison worked through his system. "I see," he said finally. Kraska's expression was unreadable. "I do not know if my arrow was the one that struck you. But it could have been, just as your blade could have killed orcs I knew." She sat back on her heels. "This is why the peace is hard. We have both spilled each other's blood." "Yes," Gabriel agreed quietly, "but perhaps that is also why it must be us who make this peace." Who else could understand what it cost? She looked at him for a long moment, something shifting in those amber eyes. Then she stood, handing him back his shirt. "Rest. Tomorrow we reach Stone Creek." That night, Gabriel dreamed of the battle at Twin Oaks, but for the first time in 2 years, he did not wake screaming. Stone Creek was not what Gabriel had expected. Tucked into a valley between two ridges, it was a collection of sturdy wooden buildings surrounding a central square. Fields of grain rippled in the wind, and he could see orchards on the hillsides, sheep grazing in fenced pastures. It looked, he realized with some surprise, not so different from a human settlement. The arrival of the traveling party drew immediate attention. Orcs emerged from buildings and fields, gathering to watch as Kraska led Gabriel through the settlement. He was acutely aware of being the only human in sight, of the stares and whispers that followed him. Kraska stopped in front of a well-built house at the edge of the settlement, close enough to be part of the community but with a bit of distance from its center. It was a good-sized dwelling, with a main room, a sleeping loft, and what looked like a small workspace attached to one side. "This is ours," she said, dismounting from her wolf. The massive creature regarded Gabriel with intelligent yellow eyes, then trotted off toward what appeared to be a stable area. "It is a good house," Gabriel said, climbing down from his horse with considerably less grace. Kraska took his horse's reins. "I will see to your animal. Go inside, make yourself." She paused, searching for the word. "Comfortable." The interior was sparse but functional. A large fireplace dominated one wall with cooking implements hanging nearby. A sturdy table and chairs sat in the center of the main room, and shelves held dishes, supplies, and a few personal items. A ladder led up to the loft, where Gabriel could see the edge of a large bed. One bed. Of course, there was only one bed. They were married. That was the entire point of the treaty, not just a symbolic union but a real one, to be consummated and, presumably, to produce children who would bridge the gap between their peoples. Gabriel sat down heavily in one of the chairs, the reality of his situation crashing over him anew. He had volunteered for this knowing what it meant, but knowing in the abstract and facing it in reality were very different things. Kraska entered carrying both their bags. She set his on the floor near the fireplace, then carried her own up to the loft. Gabriel heard her moving around up there, the soft sounds of someone unpacking and settling in. When she came back down, she found him still sitting at the table. She studied him for a moment, then moved to the fireplace and began building a fire with practiced ease. "You are afraid," she said without looking at him. "Nervous," Gabriel corrected. "This is not the life I expected to have. Nor I." She got the fire going and filled a pot with water from a bucket by the door, setting it to heat. "The elders chose me because I am unmated and because I argued for the treaty. I believed peace was better than endless war, but believing that and living it are different things." "Why did you argue for peace?" Gabriel asked. Kraska was silent for so long he thought she would not answer. Then she said, "My brother was killed in a raid 4 years ago. He was 18, barely more than a child. He went because that is what young orc men do. They prove themselves in battle. He died screaming, cut down by human cavalry. Her voice was flat, controlled. After my mother could not eat, could not sleep. She faded away and died within the year. I watched the war take my family piece by piece, and I saw it happening to every family around me. So when the elders spoke of treaty, I stood and said, yes, we must have peace, even if the price is high. I am sorry for your loss, Gabriel said quietly. I know those words are inadequate, but I mean them. She glanced at him. Your people killed my family. Why would you be sorry? Because I know what it is to lose someone to this war. And because I am tired of the hatred, tired of the cycle of revenge. Someone has to be willing to say enough. Kraska turned back to the fire. You are strange for a human. I will take that as a compliment. That earned him a brief huff that might have been amusement. She prepared a simple meal, bread and cheese and dried meat, along with some kind of pickled vegetables, and they ate in silence. It was not uncomfortable exactly, but heavy with all the things neither of them was saying. After dinner, Kraska climbed to the loft and Gabriel heard her preparing for bed. He stayed by the fire, uncertain. Should he go up? Should he sleep down here? What did she expect from him? Gabriel. Her voice came from above. Come to bed. You must be exhausted from the journey. He climbed the ladder slowly, his heart hammering. The loft was a simple space, the large bed taking up most of it, with a chest for clothes and a small window that let in the moonlight. Kraska was already under the blankets, lying on the far side of the bed, her back to the ladder. Gabriel removed his boots and jacket, then slid under the blankets, keeping as much distance between them as the bed would allow. He lay rigid, staring at the ceiling. I will not force you, Kraska said into the darkness. The treaty says we must marry. It does not say we must. Completed immediately. Relief flooded through him. Thank you. But we will have to eventually, she continued. The elders will expect it. They will watch for signs that the marriage is real. I know. Gabriel turned his head to look at her back, the strong line of her shoulders visible in the moonlight. But perhaps we could take time to know each other first, to become friends if not more. She was quiet for a moment. That is fair. Then, softer, I am glad you are not cruel. I feared they would send someone who hated orcs, who would punish me for what my people have done. I feared I was going to my death, Gabriel admitted. Or worse. Then we are both relieved to be wrong, Kraska said. Sleep now. Tomorrow I will show you the settlement, and we will begin figuring out how to live together. Gabriel closed his eyes, listening to the sound of her breathing, and found himself drifting off with surprising ease. The next weeks settled into a routine. Kraska showed Gabriel around Stone Creek, introducing him to the basic layout and explaining the rhythms of settlement life. The orcs they encountered were wary but not hostile, though Gabriel quickly learned to recognize the difference between cautious curiosity and barely concealed anger. Kraska worked as the settlement's leatherworker, crafting and repairing everything from boots to saddles to armor. Her workshop attached to their house was filled with the tools of her trade, and Gabriel often found her there, hands busy with precise, skillful work. I should find something to do as well, Gabriel said one morning watching her work. I cannot simply sit idle. What did you do before the war? Kraska asked, not looking up from the belt she was tooling. I grew up on a farm. I can work the fields, tend animals, repair buildings. He flexed his shoulder, which had improved significantly thanks to Kraska's salve. And I can hunt, track, and scout. The settlement can always use another hunter, Kraska said. Speak to Grauk. He organizes the hunting parties. Grauk turned out to be the gray-haired warrior who had translated at the wedding ceremony. He looked Gabriel up and down with undisguised skepticism when Gabriel approached him. You want to hunt with us? Grauk's human speech was rougher than Kraska's, heavily accented. You can track. I was a scout in the human army for 10 years, Gabriel said. I can track, read signs, move quietly through any terrain, and I am a fair shot with a bow. Show me. The test Grauk put him through was grueling. Gabriel had to demonstrate his tracking skills, following the trail of a deer through the forest while Grauk and 2 other orc hunters watched critically. Then they moved to archery, and Gabriel was given an orc bow larger and with a heavier draw than he was used to, and told to hit a series of targets at increasing distances. His shoulder protested the strain, but Gabriel gritted his teeth and focused. He had been good at this once, before the injury. His shots were not perfect, but they were solid, and he saw grudging respect in the orc's eyes. You will do, Grauk said finally. We go out tomorrow at dawn. Be ready. Gabriel returned home to find Kraska preparing dinner. She looked up as he entered, and he saw the question in her eyes. I am going on a hunt tomorrow, he said. Her expression shifted to something that might have been approval. Grauk does not accept just anyone. You must have impressed him. Or he wants to see if I will get myself killed in the forest, Gabriel said wryly. That too, Kraska agreed, and this time there was definitely amusement in her voice. That night, as they lay in bed still maintaining careful distance, Gabriel asked, Does it bother you that I am going hunting? I will be learning orc territories, orc methods. That information could be valuable to my people if I chose to betray you. Kraska was silent for so long he thought she was asleep. Then she said, Yes, it bothers me, but I have chosen to trust you and I must follow through on that choice. Besides, she added, and he could hear the edge in her voice, if you betray us, I will hunt you down myself. Fair enough, Gabriel said, oddly comforted by the threat. The hunt went better than Gabriel had expected. The orc hunting party consisted of 6 warriors, including himself and Grauk, and they moved through the forest with impressive coordination. Gabriel quickly learned that orcs were not the brutal, clumsy creatures human propaganda made them out to be. They were skilled trackers, moving through difficult terrain with practiced ease, communicating with subtle hand signals and reading the forest with expert eyes. They brought down an elk shortly before noon, and Gabriel's arrow was one of 3 that found their mark. The orcs butchered it efficiently, and Grauk clapped Gabriel on the shoulder with enough force to make him stagger. You are not useless, Grauk declared, which seemed to be high praise. Over the following weeks, Gabriel went on several more hunts. He learned orcish hunting techniques, picked up some of their language, and slowly earned the respect of at least some of the settlement's residents. It helped that he pulled his weight, never complained, and showed genuine interest in learning orc ways. At home, things with Kraska progressed in small increments. They began talking more over their evening meals, sharing stories of their pasts. Gabriel learned that Kraska had a dry sense of humor and a sharp intelligence, that she loved the smell of rain and hated the taste of fish, that she had wanted to be a warrior like her brother, but her talents lay in craftswork instead. In turn, Gabriel shared stories of his childhood, of learning to farm from his father and poetry from his mother, of the friends he had lost in the war, of his complicated feelings about the violence he had both witnessed and committed. One evening, about 2 months after their arrival at Stone Creek, Kraska looked up from the vest she was repairing and said, I am glad it was you who came. Gabriel felt warmth bloom in his chest. I am glad too. Their eyes met across the room, and something passed between them, recognition, perhaps, or the beginning of genuine affection. Kraska looked away first, returning to her work, but Gabriel saw the faint green flush on her cheeks that he had learned meant she was pleased or embarrassed. That night, when they climbed into bed, Gabriel found that the distance between them had shrunk. Not by much, but enough that he could feel the warmth of her body beside him. Neither of them acknowledged it, but neither moved away either. The first real test of their relationship came in early autumn. A human merchant caravan appeared at the settlement, led by a trader named Garrett who specialized in cross-border commerce. The treaty had opened up opportunities for trade, and Garrett was among the first to take advantage of it. Gabriel was working in Kraska's workshop, helping her prepare leather for a new saddle, when word of the caravan's arrival spread through the settlement. His first instinct was excitement. Other humans, people he could speak with in his native language without translation, news from the south. But he saw the tension in Kraska's shoulders, the way her jaw tightened, and he understood. This was a test. Would he remain loyal to her and the settlement, or would the pull of his own people prove too strong? "I should go greet them," Gabriel said carefully. "It would be strange if I did not, and it might ease tensions if they see that I am content here." Kraska nodded stiffly. "I will come with you." They walked to the settlement's central square together, and Gabriel was conscious of her presence beside him, tall and strong and unmistakably orcish. The merchant caravan consisted of 4 wagons and a dozen guards, all of whom looked around at the orc settlement with undisguised nervousness. Garrett himself was a portly man in his 50s, dressed in fine clothes that spoke of successful trade. His eyes widened when he saw Gabriel approaching with Kraska. "By the heavens, you are the man from the treaty," Garrett exclaimed. "Gabriel Owens, yes. I heard about your sacrifice. It is all anyone talks about in the southern settlements." "Sacrifice might be a strong word," Gabriel said mildly. "Garrett, this is my wife, Kraska. She is the settlement's master leatherworker." Kraska, Garrett is a merchant who trades in goods from both human and orc territories. He watched Garrett's face carefully, saw the moment of adjustment as the man processed the word wife and what it meant. To his credit, Garrett recovered quickly and inclined his head to Kraska. "An honor, madam. I have heard orc leatherwork is without equal. I do not suppose you would be interested in a trade arrangement. I could sell your goods in the southern markets for a fair commission." Kraska regarded him with those piercing amber eyes. "What would you offer?" The negotiations that followed were fascinating to watch. Kraska was a shrewd bargainer, never aggressive but absolutely unwilling to be cheated. Garrett clearly had not expected this level of business acumen from an orc, and Gabriel found himself biting back a smile as she maneuvered the merchant into a deal that heavily favored her interests. When they finally settled on terms, Garrett turned to Gabriel. "Might I have a word in private, Master Owens?" Gabriel glanced at Kraska, who nodded slightly. He followed Garrett a short distance away, noting that several orc warriors had positioned themselves where they could intervene if needed. "I had to ask," Garrett said in a low voice. "Are you here of your own will? If you need assistance leaving, I am exactly where I choose to be," Gabriel interrupted firmly. "I volunteered for this marriage and I am honored by it. Kraska is." He paused, searching for the right words. "She is remarkable. I am fortunate to be her husband." Garrett studied him for a long moment. "You mean that? Every word? Well then." Garrett's expression shifted to something more calculating. "In that case, you are in a unique position. You understand both human and orc cultures, have the trust of both. Have you considered offering your services as a mediator? There are disputes along the border, trade conflicts, misunderstandings that could escalate. Someone like you could prevent a great deal of trouble." It was not something Gabriel had considered, but the idea took root immediately. "That is worth thinking about," he said slowly. "Thank you for the suggestion." When he returned to Kraska's side, she asked quietly, "He offered to help you escape." "He did." I told him I had no interest in leaving. Something in her expression softened. Good. Then, so quietly he almost missed it. I would have been sad to lose you. Gabriel's heart skipped. I am not going anywhere. That night, the settlement hosted a feast to celebrate the successful trade negotiations. It was Gabriel's first real social event with the orcs, and he was nervous about how he would be received. But to his surprise, several orcs approached him during the evening, some to thank him for helping with the trade deal, others to ask about hunting techniques he had mentioned, still others simply curious about him. He found himself in conversation with a young orc woman named Vasha, who asked him direct questions about human culture with the kind of intellectual curiosity that reminded him of scholars he had known. "Is it true humans keep their dead in boxes underground?" she asked. "We bury our dead, yes," Gabriel confirmed, "in coffins made of wood. What do orcs do? We burn them," Vasha said. "Return them to fire and let their smoke rise to join the ancestors." She tilted her head. "Do humans believe the dead watch over the living? Some do. My mother believed my father watched over us after he died. I am not sure what I believe." The conversation continued, wide-ranging and surprisingly enjoyable. Gabriel noticed Kraska watching from across the fire, and when their eyes met, she smiled a real smile that showed her tusks and crinkled the corners of her eyes. Later, as the feast wound down and they walked home together under the stars, Kraska said, "You did well tonight. People are beginning to accept you." "I am trying," Gabriel said, "though I know I will always be an outsider to some extent, perhaps." She was quiet for a moment, then added, "But you are not an outsider to me anymore." Gabriel stopped walking. Kraska took a few more steps before realizing he was no longer beside her. She turned, her expression questioning. "What are we to each other?" Gabriel asked. The question had been building in him for weeks. "We are married by law and treaty and we live together, but we are still strangers in many ways. I want to know you, Kraska, truly know you, and I want you to know me." She walked back to him, closing the distance between them. This close, he had to tilt his head back slightly to meet her eyes. In the moonlight, her green skin seemed to glow and he could see the rapid pulse at her throat. "I want that too," she said softly, "but I am afraid." "Of what?" "Of caring for you and losing you, of this peace failing and finding myself on opposite sides of a war with someone I—" She trailed off, then started again. "You are not what I expected. You are kind and brave and you try so hard to understand us. When I watch you with the others, learning our ways, respecting our traditions, it does something to my heart." Gabriel reached up slowly, giving her plenty of time to pull away, and touched her face. Her skin was warm under his palm, the texture slightly rougher than human skin but not unpleasant. She leaned into the touch, her eyes closing briefly. "I am afraid too," he admitted. "But I think perhaps it is worth being afraid if it means having something real." Kraska opened her eyes. "Yes," she whispered. "It is worth it." She leaned down and Gabriel stretched up, and their lips met in a kiss that was tender and tentative and full of promise. Her tusks pressed gently against his cheeks, and he felt her hand come up to cradle the back of his head, her strong fingers threading through his hair. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing a bit harder, Kraska rested her forehead against his. "Stay with me," she said. "Not because of the treaty, but because you choose to." "I choose you," Gabriel said. "Every day I choose you." They walked the rest of the way home hand in hand, and that night when they climbed into bed, there was no distance between them at all. The first frost came early that year, painting the valley in silver and white. Gabriel woke to find Kraska already up, standing by the window and looking out at the transformed landscape. The morning light turned her green skin luminous, and she had pulled on only a shirt against the cold, leaving her long legs bare. "Beautiful," Gabriel said, and he was not talking about the frost. She glanced over her shoulder at him, a smile playing at her lips. "Come see." He climbed out of bed and joined her at the window, wrapping his arms around her waist from behind. She was so much taller than him that his chin barely reached her shoulder, but she leaned back into his embrace, and it felt natural, right? "In my clan, first frost is sacred," she said quietly. "It is when we honor those we have lost, speak their names so they are not forgotten." "Tell me about your brother," Gabriel said. "What was his name?" "Thrak." Her voice was soft with memory. "He was loud and reckless and so sure he would be a great warrior. He loved racing wolves and climbing to the highest branches of trees and making our mother worry." She paused, her hand coming up to cover Gabriel's where it rested on her stomach. "He would have liked you, I think. He always wanted to see the human lands, to understand them rather than just fight them." "What would your mother have thought of me?" Kraska was quiet for a long moment. "At first, she would have been angry, hurt that I chose a human after humans killed her son. But she was wise, my mother. I think eventually she would have seen what I see, that you are a good man trying to bridge an impossible divide. I think she would have been proud." Gabriel pressed a kiss to her shoulder. "I wish I could have met them. As I wish I could have met your parents." She turned in his arms to face him. "We cannot change the past, Gabriel. We can only try to build a better future." "Then let us build it together," he said. The autumn progressed, and Gabriel found himself settling into orc life more completely than he had imagined possible. He went on hunts regularly, learned more of the orcish language, and even began helping Kraska in her workshop, his smaller hands proving useful for detailed work. Word of Garrett's successful trade visits spread, and other merchants began arriving at Stone Creek. Some came simply to trade, but others sought Gabriel's help as a mediator. A dispute over grazing rights between a human farmer and an orc clan was resolved through his intervention. A misunderstanding about water access that could have turned violent was diffused when Gabriel helped both sides understand each other's concerns. He found he had a talent for it, seeing both perspectives, translating not just words but intent and culture, finding common ground where others saw only division. Kraska supported his efforts, often providing insight into orc customs and thinking that helped him navigate complex situations. One evening, as they worked side by side in her workshop, she said, "You are making a difference. Real change. The elders have noticed." "I am just trying to help," Gabriel said, concentrating on the stitching he was learning. "It is more than that." She set down her tools and looked at him seriously. "You are showing both our peoples that we can live together, work together, even love each other. You are proof that the treaty was not just political necessity but genuine possibility." The word love hung in the air between them. They had not said it yet, though Gabriel felt it growing in him with each passing day, in the way his heart lifted when Kraska smiled, in the warmth that flooded him when she reached for his hand, in the fierce protectiveness he felt when anyone spoke ill of her. "Kraska," he started, then stopped, unsure how to put the feeling into words. She waited, those amber eyes patient and knowing. "I love you," he said simply. "I did not expect to, did not plan for it, but I do. You are the strongest, most remarkable person I have ever known, and I wake every morning grateful that I am your husband." Her eyes widened, and for a moment she looked almost vulnerable. Then she crossed the space between them in 2 long strides and pulled him into a kiss that left him breathless. When she finally released him, there were tears in her eyes. "I love you too," she said, her voice rough with emotion. "So much it frightens me sometimes. I look at you and I cannot imagine my life without you in it." Gabriel reached up to wipe away a tear that had escaped down her cheek. "Then you will never have to imagine it. I am yours, Kraska, for as long as you will have me." "Forever then," she said. "I will have you forever." That night, they made love for the first time, a joining that was both tender and passionate, strange and perfect all at once. Gabriel learned the landscape of her body, the sensitive spots that made her gasp, the strength in her that could have broken him but instead held him with infinite care. She was patient with his inexperience. He had never been with anyone before, human or otherwise, and showed him how to pleasure her, her hands guiding his, her voice rough with desire as she taught him what she liked. Afterwards, they lay tangled together in the moonlight, her head on his chest, his fingers tracing idle patterns on her green skin. "The elders will be pleased," Kraska said drowsily. "They have been asking when we would consummate the marriage. Let them think whatever they like," Gabriel said. "This was not for the treaty or for them. This was for us." "Yes," she agreed, pressing a kiss over his heart. "For us." Winter arrived with heavy snows that isolated Stone Creek from the outside world for weeks at a time. Gabriel spent his days hunting when the weather allowed, working in the workshop when it did not, and every night curled up with Kraska by the fire or in their bed, learning the rhythms of a life built together. He taught her some of the poetry his mother had loved, translating the verses into Orcish as best he could. She taught him orc songs, the old ones passed down through generations, her deep voice filling their home with music that was both foreign and beautiful. They celebrated the orc winter festivals, and Gabriel learned the traditions, the Feast of Ancestors, where each family member spoke of those they had lost, the Night of Stars, where lovers exchanged gifts under the cold sky, the first thaw celebration where the whole settlement came together to welcome the promise of spring. For the Night of Stars, Gabriel used every skill he had to craft a gift worthy of Kraska. He worked in secret in a corner of the workshop, creating a leather bracelet tooled with intricate patterns that combined human and orc designs, roses, and oak leaves intertwined with the angular symbols of orcish clans. It took him weeks to get it right, and his fingers were sore from the unfamiliar work, but when he finally gave it to her, the look on her face made every moment worthwhile. "This is." She turned the bracelet over in her hands, her eyes taking in every detail. "Gabriel, this is beautiful." "You made this," with rather a lot of cursing and several failures, he admitted. "But yes, I wanted you to have something that represented us, both of our peoples, joined together." Kraska slipped the bracelet on, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "I will treasure it always." Then she handed him a small wrapped bundle. "Your gift." Inside was a knife, but not just any knife, a beautiful weapon with a blade forged from dark metal and a handle carved from bone, decorated with orcish symbols. Gabriel drew it from its leather sheath and gasped. The balance was perfect, the edge keen, the craftsmanship extraordinary. "This is too fine," he protested. "This is a warrior's blade." "You are a warrior," Kraska said firmly. "And more than that, you are my husband. You deserve a blade worthy of you." She pointed to the symbols carved into the handle. "This is my clan mark. And this," she indicated another symbol, "is your name in Orcish. Anyone who sees this blade will know you are under my protection, bound to me." Gabriel set the knife aside carefully and pulled her into a fierce embrace. "Thank you. I will carry it with honor." "I know you will," she said, holding him close. The peace between them was shattered on a gray morning in late winter. Gabriel had gone hunting with Grauk and two other orcs, tracking a boar that had been raiding the settlement's stores. They were miles from Stone Creek when they came across signs of a struggle, trampled snow, blood, and the tracks of horses. "Humans," Grauk said, his voice hard. "Armed party moving fast." They followed the tracks to a clearing where they found what remained of a young orc who had been out checking traps. He had been killed recently, his body still warm, hacked down with swords and left to bleed out in the snow. Gabriel felt ice in his veins as he recognized the style of the wounds. "Raiders," he said quietly, "probably deserters or outlaws who did not accept the treaty." The orcs with him exchanged dark looks. One of them, a warrior named Crush, turned to Gabriel with barely controlled fury. "Your people did this." "Not my people," Gabriel said firmly. "Criminals, murderers. They break the treaty as surely as orc raiders would." "And what would you do about it?" Crush demanded. Gabriel looked at the young orc's body, at the waste of a life barely begun, and felt the familiar rage of war rising in him. But this time, it was not directed at orcs. This time, he knew exactly who the enemy was. "Help me track them," he said. "We will bring them to justice." Grauk studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "We track." The raiders' trail was not hard to follow. They were moving fast but carelessly, confident that no one would pursue them in this weather. Gabriel and the 3 orc warriors moved with grim purpose, covering ground at a punishing pace. They caught up with the raiders that evening, finding them camped in a small cave, 6 men warming themselves around a fire and laughing over their kill. Gabriel's blood boiled as he listened to them boast about how they had surprised the green skin and how many orcs they planned to kill before anyone caught them. "We could rush them," Crush whispered. "Kill them all." "No," Gabriel said quietly. "That makes us no better than them. We take them alive if possible, bring them back for judgment." "You are soft," Crush growled. "I am just," Gabriel corrected. "There is a difference." They attacked with the discipline of trained warriors, moving as one to surround the camp. Gabriel announced their presence, giving the raiders one chance to surrender. They chose to fight instead, drawing weapons and charging. The battle was brief and brutal. The raiders were skilled but outnumbered and facing opponents who fought with cold precision. Gabriel's new knife tasted blood for the first time as he parried a sword strike and countered, opening a raider's arm from elbow to wrist. The man screamed and dropped his weapon. When it was over, 4 raiders were dead and 2 badly wounded. Gabriel stood over the survivors, his blade dark with blood, feeling the old familiar sickness of violence wash over him. "Why?" he asked them. "The war is over. There is peace." One of the wounded men spat at him. "Peace with monsters, never." "You are a traitor to your kind. Sleeping with that orc bitch." Crush's fist cut off the rest of the sentence, slamming into the man's face with enough force to knock out teeth. "You will show respect," Crush snarled. Gabriel put a hand on Crush's arm. "Enough. We bring them back. Let the elders decide their fate." The journey back to Stone Creek took most of the night, the 2 surviving raiders tied and forced to walk despite their wounds. When they finally arrived at dawn, half the settlement turned out to see what they had brought. Kraska pushed through the crowd, her eyes searching frantically until they found Gabriel. He saw her take in the blood on his clothes, the grim set of his face, the prisoners they had brought. Then she was at his side, her hands checking him for injuries. "I am fine," he said quietly. "But there is a young orc dead in the woods. These men killed him." Her face went hard. "I see." The settlement elders convened a judgment, with representatives from both the orc clans and the nearby human settlements in attendance. The raiders were tried, found guilty, and executed within the week. It was harsh justice, but necessary to show that the treaty would be enforced on both sides. In the aftermath, Gabriel found himself struggling. The violence had brought back memories he thought he had put behind him, nightmares that left him gasping awake in the darkness. Kraska held him through it, her presence a steady anchor. "You did what was necessary," she told him one night after he woke from a particularly bad dream. You protected the settlement, upheld the peace. Those men chose their path. I know, Gabriel said, but knowing it and feeling it are different things. She pulled him close, his head resting on her chest where he could hear the steady beat of her heart. The violence still lives in you. As it lives in me. The war marked us both, left scars that do not show on skin, but we are not what the war made us. We are what we choose to become. And what have I chosen? He asked. Peace, she said simply. Love. A life built on hope rather than hatred. You have chosen to be better than the worst things you have done. Gabriel closed his eyes, letting her words sink in. I choose you, he said. Every time I choose you. Then we will be enough, Kraska said, for each other and for the peace we are building. Spring arrived with a rush of melting snow and budding trees. Kraska told Gabriel she was pregnant on a morning when the world seemed to burst with new life, flowers blooming in impossible profusion and birds singing in every tree. Are you certain? He asked, his hands trembling as they rested on her still flat stomach. Very certain, she said, smiling at his reaction. We will have a child by autumn, a child of both our peoples. Gabriel felt tears on his face and did not bother to wipe them away. I am going to be a father, he said wonderingly. We are going to be parents. Yes, Kraska said. Are you happy? Happy does not begin to cover it, Gabriel said, pulling her into a kiss. I am terrified and amazed and so full of love I think I might burst. The news spread through the settlement quickly, and the reaction was mixed. Some orcs saw it as a hopeful sign, proof that the two peoples could truly unite. Others saw it as a dilution of orcish blood, a betrayal of tradition. But most fell somewhere in the middle, uncertain but willing to wait and see. The pregnancy was not easy. Kraska suffered from terrible sickness in the early months, unable to keep down food and losing weight that worried Gabriel. He devoted himself to caring for her, preparing the specific foods she could tolerate, brewing the herbal teas that helped with the nausea, sitting with her through the long nights when she could not sleep. You do not have to hover, she said one evening, but there was no heat in it. I want to, Gabriel said. Let me take care of you. You are carrying our child. The least I can do is make sure you are comfortable. As her belly swelled with the growing child, Kraska's mood swung wildly between joy and anxiety. She worried the baby would not be healthy, that mixing human and orc blood would create problems. Gabriel soothed her fears as best he could, though privately he shared some of them. No one they knew of had ever borne a half-human, half-orc child. They were venturing into unknown territory. The settlement's healer, an ancient orc woman named Marga, examined Kraska regularly. She pronounced the pregnancy healthy but warned that the birth might be difficult. Orc babies are large, Marga said bluntly. Even with human blood, this child will be bigger than a full human infant. You must be prepared for a hard labor. Kraska took the news calmly, but Gabriel saw the fear in her eyes. That night he held her close and said, You are the strongest person I know. You will survive this. Both of you will. Promise me, she said, her voice small in a way he had never heard before. If it comes to a choice, it will not, Gabriel interrupted fiercely. Do not even think such things. Promise me you will save the baby, Kraska insisted. Whatever happens, our child must live. Our child needs their mother, Gabriel said. I will not make that promise because I will not lose you. She argued, but he held firm and eventually she subsided, though he knew the worry still gnawed at her. Summer brought its own challenges. The heat made Kraska uncomfortable, her swollen belly making even simple tasks difficult. Gabriel took over more of the physical work, both in the workshop and around the house. He learned leatherworking in earnest, his skills improving under Kraska's patient instruction. so he could maintain the business while she rested. The settlement had grown accustomed to him by now. Children no longer stared when he walked by, and he was included in community decisions as a full member rather than a curiosity. He mediated disputes, helped with the harvest, and taught some of the younger orcs tracking and scouting techniques in exchange for lessons in orcish weapon craft and lore. One afternoon, as Gabriel worked in the fields alongside other settlement members, Grauk approached him. "You have become one of us," the old warrior said without preamble. "The elders wish to make it official. They want to adopt you into the clan, give you full rights and status." Gabriel straightened, surprised. "I am honored, but I am still human." "You are human who has married into our people, who fights for our settlement, who will father one of our children," Grauk said. "Blood is not the only thing that makes a clan. Choice matters too. You have chosen us." "Yes," Gabriel said softly. "I have chosen you, all of you." The adoption ceremony took place at the next full moon, with the entire settlement in attendance. Gabriel knelt before the clan elders and spoke the words of binding in Orcish, pledging himself to the clan's welfare and accepting their traditions as his own. They marked his forehead with ash and blood, symbols of death and life, and declared him Taruk Kraska, literally stone strong, a name that honored both his determination and his marriage to Kraska. When Kraska placed a ceremonial necklace of carved bone around his neck, marking him as clan-bound, her eyes shone with tears and pride. "You are mine now in every way," she said softly. "By marriage and by clan, nothing can separate us." "Nothing," Gabriel agreed. "I am yours and you are mine, for all our days." The birth came on a stormy autumn night, with wind howling around the house and rain lashing the windows. Kraska's labor began in the late afternoon and continued through the night, long and difficult, just as Marga had warned. Gabriel stayed by her side, holding her hand, wiping sweat from her face, whispering encouragement even when she cursed him for putting her through this. Marga worked with calm efficiency, assisted by 2 other women experienced in birthing. But as the hours dragged on and Kraska's strength began to flag, Gabriel saw worry creep into even Marga's weathered face. "The baby is large," Marga said quietly. "Positioned wrong. I need to turn it." What followed was the longest hour of Gabriel's life. Kraska screamed in pain as Marga worked, and Gabriel felt utterly helpless, able to do nothing but hold her and pray to gods he was not sure he believed in. Finally, Marga stepped back. "Now," she said. "Push now, child." Kraska bore down with a roar that shook the rafters, her hand crushing Gabriel's. He felt bones creak but did not pull away. Again and again she pushed, until finally, as dawn broke gray and wet beyond the windows, a baby's cry split the air. "A son," Marga announced, holding up a squalling infant. "Healthy and strong." Gabriel looked at his child and felt his heart expand beyond what he thought possible. The baby was indeed large, bigger than a human newborn, with skin that was a lighter green than Kraska's but unmistakably orcish. Small nubs showed where tusks would eventually grow, and his ears were pointed like his mother's. But his eyes, when they blinked open, were the same blue-gray as Gabriel's own. "He is perfect," Gabriel breathed. Marga cleaned the baby and placed him in Kraska's arms. She looked exhausted, her face gray with fatigue, but when she gazed down at their son, she smiled with pure joy. "Look what we made," she said softly. "Half of each of us wholly himself." Gabriel leaned down to kiss her forehead. "You are so brave, so strong. I am in awe of you." "We should name him," Kraska said, her fingers exploring the baby's tiny hands, his soft skin. "Something that honors both our peoples." They had discussed names throughout the pregnancy, never quite settling on one. But now, looking at their son, Gabriel knew what felt right. "Thrak," he said softly, "for your brother, but with a human middle name perhaps. Thomas, for my friend who helped me find the courage to volunteer." Kraska's eyes filled with tears. "Thrak Thomas," she said, testing it. "Yes, he will carry both our histories forward." Little Thrak was everything Gabriel had not known to hope for. The baby was healthy, with a strong cry and healthy appetite. As the weeks passed, Gabriel fell into the rhythms of fatherhood, changing cloths, walking the floor at all hours when Thrak fussed, marveling at every small development. The settlement embraced the child as one of their own. Even the orcs who had been most skeptical of Gabriel found themselves softening when they saw him with his son, teaching the baby orcish lullabies in his accented voice or crafting tiny toys with his improving leatherwork skills. Kraska recovered from the birth slowly, and Gabriel devoted himself to caring for both her and Thrak. He had never been happier, even exhausted and covered in baby spit up, even during the long nights when Thrak would not sleep. This, he realized, was what he had been searching for all his life without knowing it: a family, a purpose beyond violence, a love that anchored him to the world. One afternoon, when Thrak was about 3 months old, Garrett the merchant arrived with his caravan. He had become a regular visitor, his trade route now including Stone Creek as a major stop. Gabriel greeted him warmly, Thrak balanced on his hip. "By the heavens, is that your son?" Garrett asked, staring. "This is Thrak," Gabriel said proudly. "Thrak Thomas Owens." Garrett leaned in to peer at the baby, who grabbed his beard with a surprisingly strong grip. "He is beautiful and significant. I do not suppose you realize what you have done here. Produced a child who does not sleep through the night," Gabriel asked wryly. "Proved that humans and orcs can create a family together," Garrett said seriously. "There are those on both sides who claimed it could not be done, that the species were too different. Your son is living proof that they were wrong." Gabriel looked down at Thrak, who was now trying to eat Garrett's beard. "He is just a baby, a child who deserves to grow up in peace." "He is a symbol," Garrett insisted. "Already I have heard talk in the southern settlements. Some speak of him with hope, others with fear, but all speak of him." "Let them talk," Kraska said, emerging from the house. She crossed to Gabriel and Thrak, completing the picture of their family. "Our son is not a symbol or a political statement. He is ours, and we will protect him from those who would make him into something he is not." "Of course," Garrett said quickly. "I meant no disrespect. I only wanted you to be aware that the world is watching." After Garrett left, Gabriel and Kraska sat together on the porch, Thrak nursing contentedly. "You think he is right?" Gabriel asked quietly. "That our son will bear the burden of being a symbol, perhaps," Kraska said. "But he will also have us. We will teach him to be strong, to be proud of both his heritages, to stand against those who would judge him for being different." She looked up at Gabriel. "He will know he is loved. That is what matters most." "Yes," Gabriel agreed, wrapping his arm around his wife and child. "Love is what matters." Thrak grew quickly, developing faster than a human child but not quite at the pace of a full orc. By his first birthday, he was walking and babbling in a mixture of human and orcish words. He had his mother's green skin and pointed ears, his father's eyes and smile, and a personality entirely his own, curious, fearless, and affectionate. Gabriel taught him to recognize different plants and animals, to track rabbits through the meadow, to carve simple shapes from wood. Kraska taught him orcish songs and the names of the ancestors, the traditions of the clan. Together, they raised him to belong to both worlds. The settlement prospered in those years. The trade routes Garrett had established brought wealth and connection, and other mixed marriages began to occur cautiously at first, then with increasing frequency. A human woman named Teresa married an orc craftsman. An orc warrior took a human man as his partner. Each union was a small victory for the peace, proof that the treaty had opened possibilities beyond mere non-aggression. Gabriel found himself increasingly called upon to mediate disputes, not just between humans and orcs, but within their own communities. His ability to see multiple perspectives, to find common ground, made him invaluable. The Regional Council, a new body created to oversee treaty implementation, appointed him as an official arbiter, a position that came with both authority and responsibility. It meant travel, sometimes for days at a time, riding out to distant settlements to help resolve conflicts. Gabriel hated being away from Kraska and Thrak, but he believed in the work. Each problem he helped solve, each potential conflict he diffused, was another brick in the foundation of lasting peace. Kraska supported his work even when it meant she bore more of the childcare alone. "You are building a world where our son can grow up safe," she told him. "That is worth the sacrifice." But the sacrifices took their toll. Gabriel came home from one particularly difficult mediation to find Thrak sick with fever, Kraska exhausted from 3 days of nursing him alone. Guilt crashed over him as he held his feverish son, whispering apologies into his dark hair. "You cannot be everywhere," Kraska said gently, "and we managed, but perhaps you need to be more selective about which cases you take." "You are right," Gabriel said. "My first duty is to my family." They found a better balance after that. Gabriel took only the most critical cases, the ones where his unique perspective was truly needed. The rest of the time, he focused on his family and the settlement, on the quiet joy of watching Thrak grow and the deep contentment of a life built with Kraska. When Thrak was 3, Kraska told Gabriel she was pregnant again. This time, the news was met with less fear and more pure happiness. They knew what to expect now, knew they could survive the challenges. Their daughter was born on a spring morning when the cherry trees were in bloom, filling the air with sweet perfume. The birth was easier than Thrak's had been, and their daughter emerged into the world with a lusty cry that made everyone laugh. She had her father's lighter skin tone, but with a definite green tint, her mother's amber eyes, and the most beautiful pointed ears Gabriel had ever seen. They named her Alara Rose, honoring both traditions. Thrak was fascinated by his baby sister, wanting to hold her and help with everything. Gabriel watched his son's gentle care of the infant and felt his heart swell with pride. This was what peace looked like, not treaties and councils, but a little boy learning to love his sister, a family growing together without the shadow of war. Years passed in a blur of happiness. Thrak started learning to read and write in both human and orcish scripts. Alara took her first steps, spoke her first words. Gabriel's hair began to show silver at the temples, and Kraska's face bore laugh lines that came from years of smiling. They added to their house, building a second floor to give the children their own rooms. Gabriel's skills as a leatherworker had grown to match Kraska's, and they worked side by side, their partnership extending to all areas of their life. On quiet evenings, they would sit by the fire, children finally asleep, and simply enjoy being together. "Did you ever imagine it would be like this?" Kraska asked one such evening, her head resting on Gabriel's shoulder. "When you crossed the border that day, did you think you would find happiness?" "No," Gabriel admitted. "I thought I was going to my death, or at best to a life of miserable duty. I never imagined I would find you, that we would build this." He gestured around at their home, at the life they had created. "I never imagined I could be this happy." "Nor did I," Kraska said softly. "I volunteered thinking I was sacrificing myself for peace. Instead, I found everything I did not know I wanted. Gabriel turned to kiss her, a slow, sweet kiss that still made his heart race even after all these years. I love you, he said. More with each passing day. And I love you, Krasker replied. My heart, my partner, my home. Challenges still came, of course. There were still those on both sides who opposed the mixing of peoples, who saw their family as an abomination. When Thrak was 7, he came home crying because some orc children had called him half-breed, and said he did not belong. Gabriel held his son while Kraska went to speak with the children's parents, her anger a cold, controlled thing. But it was Gabriel who talked to Thrak, who explained that some people feared what was different, that their cruelty came from ignorance and hate. You are not less because you are both, Gabriel told his son. You are more. You have the best of both worlds, the strength of orcs and the adaptability of humans. You are proof that our peoples can become one. Never let anyone make you feel ashamed of who you are. But it hurts, Thrak said, his voice small. Why do they hate me? Because they are afraid, Gabriel said. Afraid of change, of a world that is different from what they know. But their fear does not define you. You decide who you are. Krasker returned and gathered Thrak into her arms. You are my son, she said fiercely. Clan-born and blood-bound, anyone who says otherwise will answer to me. Thrak hugged them both, drawing comfort from their certainty. And over time, as he grew older and more confident, the taunts bothered him less. He made friends among both orc and human children, became known for his kindness and his skill at tracking. He was becoming exactly what Gabriel had hoped to bridge between worlds. When Gabriel was 45 and Kraska 42, the regional council approached them with a request. They wanted Gabriel and Kraska to travel to the capital cities of both the human kingdom and the orc territories, to speak to the rulers about expanding the treaty, about creating more settlements where the peoples could live together. It would mean months away, Gabriel said, discussing it with Kraska. Thrak and Alara would have to stay here with friends. They are old enough now, Kraska said. Thrak was 12, Alara 9, old enough to understand and to be safe with trusted caregivers. And this could change everything. If we can convince the rulers to support integration more fully, to encourage intermarriage and cooperation, it could ensure a lasting peace, Gabriel finished. Not just for our generation, but for our grandchildren. They accepted the commission, spending long evenings preparing their arguments, gathering testimony from other mixed families, documenting the success of Stone Creek and similar settlements. When they finally set out, it was with the hope that they could change the world. The journey was long and sometimes dangerous. They faced prejudice in human cities where orcs were still feared and hated, skepticism in orc strongholds where humans were seen as weak and untrustworthy. But they persisted, telling their story with honesty and passion, showing proof of what could be achieved when people chose cooperation over conflict. In the human capital, they spoke before the king and his court, Gabriel describing the raid that had cost him his family farm, the years of war, the decision to volunteer for the treaty. Kraska spoke of her brother's death, her mother's grief, the cycle of violence that consumed both peoples. We do not ask you to forget the past, Gabriel said. We ask you to choose a different future, one where our children do not have to fight and die, where families are not torn apart by war. Look at us, Kraska added, reaching for Gabriel's hand. Human and orc, husband and wife, parents to children who are both and neither. We are proof that peace is possible, that love can bridge any divide. The king listened, his expression thoughtful. In the end, he agreed to expand support for integration efforts, to provide resources for more mixed settlements, to actively encourage cooperation rather than merely tolerating it, In the orc territories, they faced even greater skepticism. Many orc clans still saw the treaty as a necessary evil rather than an opportunity. But they told their story again, and slowly, they saw minds begin to change. An old clan matriarch who had lost 3 sons to the war stood and said, "I hated humans with every breath in my body. But I look at you, at the life you have built, and I think, what if my sons had lived to see this peace? What if they could have had families, children, futures beyond the battlefield? I cannot bring them back, but perhaps I can honor their memory by supporting the peace they died without knowing." One by one, other voices joined hers. Not everyone was convinced, but enough were moved that the Orc Council agreed to match the Human King's commitment resources for integration, support for mixed marriages, active efforts to build bridges between the peoples. Gabriel and Krasger returned to Stone Creek 6 months after they had left, exhausted but triumphant. Thrak and Alara met them at the settlement border, running to throw themselves into their parents' arms. "Did you do it?" Thrak asked excitedly. "Did you convince them?" "We did," Gabriel said, ruffling his son's hair. "Both sides have agreed to support integration more fully. There will be funding for new settlements, protections for mixed families, educational exchanges." "You changed the world," Alara said with the certainty of youth. "We nudged it in a better direction," Kraska corrected gently. "The real change will take generations, but we have started something that I believe will last." That night, reunited in their own bed, Gabriel and Kraska held each other close. "We have done something extraordinary," Gabriel said quietly. "Not just us, but everyone who chose peace, everyone who took a risk on love instead of hate." "Yes," Kraska agreed. "And it started with you stepping forward when no one else would, with your courage to cross that border." "No," Gabriel said. "It started with both of us choosing to see each other as people instead of enemies, choosing to build instead of destroy." "Together," Kraska said, kissing him softly. "Everything we have accomplished, we have done together." The years that followed saw the fruition of their work. New settlements sprang up along the border, places where humans and orcs lived and worked side by side. Intermarriage became more common, more accepted. The children of these unions, like Thrak and Alara, grew up in a world where the old hatreds were fading, replaced by cautious cooperation and, in many cases, genuine friendship. Thrak, at 18, fell in love with a human girl named Teresa, and married her in a ceremony that blended both traditions. Gabriel watched his son pledge his life to his chosen partner, and felt the circle complete itself. His own marriage had made this possible, had created a world where his son could love whom he chose without fear. Alara showed a talent for diplomacy that rivaled her father's, and by her 16th year she was already helping to mediate disputes in the settlement. Gabriel taught her everything he knew, watching with pride as she developed her own style, her own methods. Gabriel himself began to slow down as he entered his 50s. The old war wound in his shoulder ached more, and he tired more easily, but he had no regrets. He spent his days working in the shop with Kraska, playing with his grandchildren, Thrak and Teresa's twins, a boy and a girl, and simply enjoying the peace he had helped build. One evening, sitting on the porch as the sun set over Stone Creek, Kraska said, "Do you ever think about that day at the border, about the choice you made?" "Sometimes," Gabriel admitted. "I think about how terrified I was, how certain I was that I was sacrificing my life. And then I think about everything that came after, and I cannot imagine any other path." "You saved me," Kraska said softly. "I was so angry then, so full of grief for my brother and my mother. I thought I was volunteering out of duty, but really, I was trying to punish myself. You showed me that I could live again, that I could love and be happy." "And you saved me," Gabriel replied. I was dying inside, haunted by the war, by the things I had done. You gave me purpose, a reason to hope. You taught me that I was more than a warrior, more than the violence I had committed. They sat in comfortable silence, hands clasped, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. Around them, Stone Creek settled into night, children being called in for dinner, lights flickering on in windows, the sounds of a community at peace. No regrets? Kraska asked eventually. Not a single one, Gabriel said. I would make the same choice 1,000 times over. As would I, Kraska said, leaning her head on his shoulder. You are my heart, Gabriel Owens, today, tomorrow, and for all the days we have left. And you are mine, Kraska, Gabriel replied. My love, my partner, my home. They sat together as the night deepened, two souls who had found each other across the divide of war and hate, who had built a life of love and hope. Behind them, their house glowed with warm light, filled with the family they had created, the legacy they would leave. The treaty had said one human must marry one orc. Gabriel had stepped forward so no one else had to, expecting sacrifice and duty. Instead, he had found everything worth living for. And in finding it, he had helped build a bridge between two peoples, proving that even the deepest divisions could be healed with courage, compassion, and love. The peace would outlast him, carried forward by his children and their children, by every mixed family that chose hope over fear. But on that quiet evening, sitting beside the woman he loved more than life itself, Gabriel was not thinking about legacy or history. He was simply thinking how lucky he was, how blessed, to have made the choice he made all those years ago at the border. To have crossed that line into the unknown and found, waiting on the other side, the love of his life. Thank you, he said quietly. For what? Kraska asked. For choosing me, Gabriel said. For loving me. For building this life with me. Kraska lifted her head to look at him, her amber eyes soft with emotion. I should be thanking you. You gave up everything, your home, your people, your old life for a stranger who was supposed to be your enemy. I gained everything, Gabriel corrected. You, our children, this community, this peace. I regret nothing. She kissed him then, a soft press of lips that spoke of decades of love and trust and partnership. When they parted, both had tears in their eyes. Come, Kraska said, standing and pulling him to his feet. Let us go inside. Our family waits, and I want to spend the evening surrounded by the people we love. Gabriel took her hand and followed her into the house, into the warmth and light and laughter of the life they had built together. Behind them, the stars wheeled overhead, ancient and constant, watching over a world that was slowly, inexorably, healing from the wounds of war. And in Stone Creek, in a house filled with love, a family gathered, human and orc, and the beautiful children born of both, proof that peace was possible, that love could conquer hate, and that sometimes the bravest choice was simply to step forward when everyone else stepped back. Gabriel had stepped forward at the border that day, not knowing what awaited him. He had expected duty, sacrifice, perhaps even death. What he found instead was Kraska, strong and fierce and tender, his perfect match in every way. Together, they had built something extraordinary, not just a marriage or a family, but a foundation for lasting peace. As he sat down to dinner, surrounded by his loved ones, Kraska at his side, Thrak and Teresa with their twins, Alara chattering about her latest diplomatic success, friends and neighbors who had become family, Gabriel felt a profound sense of contentment. This was what mattered. Not grand gestures or dramatic sacrifices, but the quiet accumulation of days spent with people you loved, building a life of meaning and purpose. The twins, 6-year-old Marcus and Miranda, climbed into his lap, demanding a story. Gabriel obliged, telling them about the day he first met their grandmother, carefully editing it for young ears. But even the censored version held wonder: two people from warring nations, coming together despite everything that should have kept them apart, choosing love over fear. "Were you scared, Grandpa?" Miranda asked, her eyes wide. "Very scared," Gabriel admitted. "But sometimes the things that scare us most turn out to be the best things that ever happened to us." "Because you met Grandma," Marcus proclaimed. "Exactly right," Gabriel said, meeting Kraska's eyes across the table. She smiled at him, that special smile that still made his heart skip after all these years. Later, after everyone had gone home and the children were in bed, Gabriel and Kraska prepared for sleep. The rituals were so familiar now: washing up, changing clothes, climbing into bed on their respective sides. But the familiarity was comforting, a reminder of all the nights they had shared, all the mornings they had woken up together. "I have been thinking," Kraska said as they settled under the blankets. "We should write it all down, our story from the beginning, so that our grandchildren and their grandchildren will know how it happened, how the peace began." "You want to write our memoir?" Gabriel asked, amused. "Not just ours. All the first couples, all the families who chose integration when it was still dangerous and uncertain. Their stories should be remembered, honored." She propped herself up on one elbow to look at him. "What we did mattered, Gabriel. The choice you made that day at the border, my choice to accept you as my husband, every choice we made after they changed the course of history. That should not be forgotten." Gabriel considered it. "You are right. Future generations should know it was not easy, that real people with real fears made brave choices. Not because they were saints or heroes, but because they believed peace was worth fighting for." "Then we will do it," Kraska said decisively. "We will start tomorrow. We can interview the others, collect their stories along with our own." "Tomorrow," Gabriel agreed. "But tonight, I just want to hold you." Kraska settled back into his arms, her head on his chest, her hand over his heart. They lay in comfortable silence, listening to each other breathe, feeling the steady beat of their hearts. "Gabriel," Kraska's voice was soft in the darkness. "Yes, love. I am grateful every day for your courage, for the man you are, for the life we have built together." Gabriel pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "As am I. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Kraska. You and our family and this beautiful life we have created. I would not change a single moment." "Even the hard parts?" she asked. "The war wounds, the prejudice, the difficult birth with Thrak. Even those," Gabriel said firmly. "They shaped us, taught us, made us stronger, and they led us here to this moment, to this peace. I would endure it all again for the same result." Kraska made a satisfied sound and snuggled closer. Within minutes, her breathing had evened out into sleep. Gabriel lay awake a while longer, his mind wandering over the path that had brought them here. He thought about the young man he had been, wounded and weary, volunteering for what he thought was a suicide mission. He thought about Kraska as she had been then, fierce and grieving, agreeing to marry an enemy for the sake of peace. How far they had both come. How much they had grown, together and separately. The treaty had demanded one human marry one orc. It was a cold, political arrangement, designed to bind two peoples through the most fundamental of human connections. But what had started as obligation had become genuine love, and that love had rippled outward, touching countless lives and changing the world. Gabriel was just one man who had made one choice, but that choice had mattered. It had led to a family, a community, a peace that was still fragile but growing stronger with each passing year. His grandchildren would grow up in a world where humans and orcs worked together, married each other, raised children who belonged to both peoples, and yet were their own unique selves. That was a legacy worth having. As sleep finally claimed him, Gabriel's last conscious thought was of gratitude for Kraska, for their children, for the life they had built, and for the courage to step forward when it mattered most. He had stepped forward so no one else had to. And in doing so, he had found everything he never knew he needed. The next morning dawned bright and clear, the beginning of another day in a life full of purpose and love. Gabriel woke to find Kraska already up, making breakfast, humming one of the orc songs he had come to love. He joined her in the kitchen, wrapping his arms around her from behind and swaying to the music. "Good morning, my heart," he murmured against her neck. "Good morning," she replied, turning in his arms to kiss him. "Ready to start our memoir project?" "Ready for anything as long as I am with you," Gabriel said. And it was true. Whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever work remained to be done to secure the peace, he would face it with Kraska at his side. Together, they had already accomplished the impossible. Together, there was nothing they could not do. They spent the morning gathering materials, paper, ink, interview questions, and making a list of the other mixed couples they wanted to speak with. By afternoon, they were conducting their first interview with an orc woman named Vasha and her human husband, documenting the story of how they had met and fallen in love despite family opposition. The project consumed them over the following months, and with each story they collected, Gabriel felt more certain that this was important work. These were not just personal histories, but the foundation stones of a new world. Each couple had faced their own challenges, made their own sacrifices, and emerged with love that transcended the old boundaries. As the collection of stories grew, Gabriel began to see patterns: the fear that preceded first meetings, the slow building of trust, the moment when obligation became genuine affection, the challenges of raising children in a world that did not always accept them. But also the joy, the deep satisfaction of building something meaningful together, the pride in children who represented hope for the future. When they finally compiled everything into a single manuscript, it was hundreds of pages long, a comprehensive record of the first generation of peace. Kraska suggested they call it "Crossing the Border," the first families of the treaty. They presented it to the regional council, which immediately recognized its value. Copies were made and distributed to schools and libraries throughout both human and orc territories. Teachers used it to help students understand the history of the peace, the real people who had made it possible. Years later, Gabriel received a letter from a young woman half-orc like his own children who wrote to thank him. She had grown up feeling isolated and different, questioning whether she belonged anywhere. Then she had read the memoir and found her own family's story included among the others. "You showed me that I am not alone," she wrote. "That there are others like me, that our existence has meaning and purpose. You proved that people like us can live full, happy lives, that we are not mistakes or aberrations but proof of what is possible when people choose love. Thank you for being brave enough to share your story." Gabriel read the letter aloud to Kraska, his voice breaking with emotion. She took his hand and squeezed. "This is why we did it," she said, "so that children like her would know they are valued, that they belong." "We did well," Gabriel said softly. "You and I, we did something that matters." "Yes," Kraska agreed. "We did." As Gabriel entered his 60s, he began to slow down more noticeably. The old war wound troubled him more frequently, and he tired more easily. But he remained active, still hunting occasionally, still helping in the workshop, still mediating disputes when his expertise was needed. Thrak had taken over much of the diplomatic work, traveling to help settle conflicts just as his father had done. He was good at it, perhaps even better than Gabriel had been, with his unique perspective and his natural charisma. Gabriel could not have been prouder. Ilara had married an orc warrior named Crash and was expecting her first child. The news that he would soon be a grandfather again filled Gabriel with joy. He spent time crafting a cradle for the coming baby, working slowly and carefully to create something that would last for generations. Kraska, too, showed signs of age. Her dark hair had silvered, and she moved more stiffly in the mornings. But she remained strong, still working in her shop, still the center of their family and community. They celebrated their 30th anniversary with a feast that brought together humans and orcs from settlements throughout the region. People came to honor them, to thank them for the example they had set, for the bridge they had built between peoples. Standing before the gathered crowd, Gabriel looked out at the sea of green and pale faces, orc and human, and the children who were both. He thought about how impossible this would have seemed 30 years ago, how the young man who had stepped forward at the border crossing would have marveled at this moment. 30 years ago, I volunteered for what I thought was a death sentence, Gabriel said, his voice carrying across the quiet crowd. I crossed the border expecting duty and sacrifice. Instead, I found love beyond measure, a family that is my greatest joy, and a community that has become my home. I found Kraska. He turned to his wife, who stood beside him in a dress of finest leather that she had tooled herself, decorated with both human and orc symbols. You have been my partner in everything, my anchor and my wings, the love of my life. Every good thing I have accomplished, I accomplished because you were beside me. Thank you for choosing me, for loving me, for building this beautiful life with me. Kraska's eyes shone with tears. She took his hand and addressed the crowd. Gabriel stepped forward so others would not have to. He sacrificed his old life, his comfort, his safety for people he did not know. That courage changed everything. It gave us this peace, these families, this hope. I am honored to be his wife, to have stood beside him all these years, to have built a family and a future together. She turned to Gabriel. You are my heart today and always. I love you more than words can express. They kissed to thunderous applause, surrounded by the people whose lives they had touched, the community they had helped build. Later, as they lay in bed, exhausted but happy, Kraska said, 30 years. It seems both forever and like no time at all. I know what you mean, Gabriel said. Some days I still feel like that terrified man at the border about to cross into the unknown. Other days I cannot remember a time when you were not at the center of my world. We have had a good life, Kraska said. A very good life. The best, Gabriel agreed. And we still have time ahead of us. I plan to be a very involved grandfather to Ilara's baby. Kraska laughed softly. You will spoil the child rotten. That is what grandparents are for, Gabriel said with mock solemnity. They drifted off to sleep wrapped in each other's arms, secure in the life they had built, the love they had nurtured, the legacy they would leave. Gabriel lived to see his 70th birthday, celebrated with his entire extended family around him, children and grandchildren, and even a great-grandchild, the son of Thrak's daughter. He held the baby in his arms, marveling at the miracle of new life, at the way this tiny person carried forward the peace he and Kraska had helped forge. What will the world be like for you? He whispered to the sleeping infant. Will you grow up never knowing war? Will the old hatreds seem as distant and strange to you as they once seemed immediate to me? I hope so. I hope we have built something lasting enough that you and your children will live in true peace. Kraska sat beside him, her hand on his knee, watching him with their great-grandson. You are thinking deep thoughts, she observed. Just hoping we have done enough, Gabriel said, that the peace will last beyond us. It will, Kraska said with certainty. Look at this child, at all our grandchildren and great-grandchildren. They are the peace, Gabriel. They are the living proof that our peoples can become one. As long as they exist, as long as families like ours exist, the peace will endure. Gabriel nodded slowly. You are right. We have not just built a political peace, but a generational one, written into the very blood and bones of our descendants. Yes, Kraska said. So rest easy, my love. We have done well. In his final years, Gabriel's health declined steadily. The old wound that had never fully healed finally took its toll, complicated by the simple wearing down of a body that had lived hard and given much. But he faced it with the same quiet courage he had shown at the border crossing so many years ago. Kraska was his constant companion, caring for him with gentle hands and fierce determination. When the pain was bad, she held him through it. When he grew frustrated with his failing body, she reminded him of all he had accomplished, the legacy he was leaving. I am not ready to leave you, Gabriel said one evening as they sat together, his hand clasped in hers. I am not ready to let you go, Kraska replied, her voice rough with unshed tears. But when the time comes, I will be grateful for every moment we had together. Promise me something, Gabriel said. Promise me you will live fully even after I am gone. Do not close yourself off from joy. Our family needs you, the community needs you. I promise, Kraska said, though the words cost her, but you must promise me something as well. Promise me you will fight to stay as long as you can. I am not done needing you yet. I promise, Gabriel said, I will stay as long as I am able. He kept that promise for 2 more years, seeing Alara's second child born, watching Thrak's twins become strong, capable young adults, holding Kraska close through countless nights. When the end finally came, it was peaceful, a gradual fading rather than a sudden loss. His family gathered around him in his final days. Thrak and Alara, their spouses and children. Friends who had become family over the decades. And always Kraska, her hand in his, her presence a steady anchor. On his last night, as consciousness began to slip away, Gabriel looked at Kraska and smiled. No regrets, he whispered. None at all, she agreed, tears streaming down her face. You gave me everything, Gabriel Owens. You were the best man I have ever known. I love you, Gabriel said. Today, tomorrow, and beyond the end of days. And I love you, Kraska replied. Forever and always, my heart. Gabriel closed his eyes and let go, slipping away peacefully with the woman he loved holding his hand. The settlement mourned him deeply. Humans and orcs alike came to pay their respects, to share stories of how he had touched their lives, how his courage and compassion had changed the world. They honored him in both traditions, a human burial in a wooden coffin and an orc ceremony of fire and remembrance. Kraska stood at his graveside, her children and grandchildren surrounding her, and spoke of the man he had been. Gabriel stepped forward when everyone else stepped back, she said, her voice carrying clear and strong despite her grief. He chose duty over comfort, love over fear, hope over despair. He was not perfect. He struggled with the weight of what he had done in war, with the scars both visible and invisible that violence had left on him. But he never stopped trying to be better, to do better, to build something meaningful from the ashes of conflict. She looked out at the gathered crowd, so many mixed faces, so many families that existed because Gabriel had been brave enough to cross that border. He gave me everything, Kraska continued. Love, family, purpose, joy. He showed me that even the deepest wounds can heal, that even enemies can become beloved. He was my partner in all things, my heart made manifest in another person. I will miss him every day for the rest of my life, but I am so grateful I had him at all. She placed a hand on the coffin. Rest well, my love. You have earned your peace. The work you started will continue. The bridge you helped build will stand. And every day, in every choice I make, In every moment with our family, I will honor the life we built together. Kraska lived for another 15 years after Gabriel's death, time she spent ensuring his legacy endured. She updated their memoir to include the full scope of his life, his final years, and the impact of his work. She helped establish a foundation to support mixed families and to fund educational programs about integration and cooperation. She watched her grandchildren and great-grandchildren grow, seeing in them the future Gabriel had fought for. She remained active in the community, a respected elder whose advice was sought on matters both personal and political. But always, she carried Gabriel with her in the leather bracelet she still wore that he had made so many years ago, in the memories that sustained her, in the love that death could not diminish. When her own time came, she went peacefully in her sleep, surrounded by family. Her children buried her beside Gabriel, reuniting them in death as they had been in life. On the headstone they placed above the shared grave, they inscribed simple words: Gabriel Owens and Kraska, beloved parents and grandparents, pioneers of peace. They stepped forward so others could walk together. The settlement of Stone Creek thrived for generations, growing from a small border outpost into a thriving town where humans and orcs lived in complete integration. The house Gabriel and Kraska had built and expanded over the years became a historical site, preserved as a museum dedicated to the first families of the treaty. School children came to visit, to see where the man who had volunteered at the border had lived with his orc wife, to learn about the courage it took to choose love over hate, peace over war. They read the memoir, studied the artifacts, and learned that history was made not by distant, perfect heroes, but by real people making hard choices. Thrax's grandson, named Gabriel in honor of his great-grandfather, became a leader in the movement to fully integrate human and orc governments, to move beyond the treaty and toward true unity. When he spoke publicly, he always invoked the memory of the grandparents he had never met but whose legacy had shaped his entire life. My great-grandfather stepped forward at the border not knowing what waited for him, Gabriel the younger would say. He expected sacrifice. He found love. That simple act of courage rippled outward, touching thousands of lives, eventually millions. It proved that peace is possible, that different peoples can not only coexist but thrive together. We stand on the foundation he and my great-grandmother built. It is our responsibility to continue the work, to keep building until the divisions that once seemed insurmountable are nothing but history. The world that emerged in the generations after Gabriel and Kraska was not perfect. Prejudice still existed. Conflicts still arose, and the work of integration continued to be challenging. But it was a world fundamentally changed by the choice one man had made to step forward when everyone else stepped back. Mixed marriages became common, then unremarkable. Children who were both human and orc grew up without the stigma their grandparents had faced. The old battle lines blurred and eventually faded, replaced by a society that valued individuals for their character and contributions, rather than their bloodline or species. Historians studying the period identified the volunteer treaty marriages as the crucial turning point, the moment when theoretical peace became lived reality. And among those marriages, Gabriel and Kraska stood out not because it was unique, but because they had documented it so thoroughly, had shared their story so openly, had made themselves symbols of what was possible. Their memoir was required reading in schools, translated into dozens of languages, studied by scholars and casual readers alike. Couples facing their own challenges drew strength from the knowledge that even Gabriel had been terrified, that even Kraska had doubted, but they had persevered and built something beautiful. The treaty said one human must marry one orc. That was the political reality. But Gabriel Owens had stepped forward so no one else had to. And in doing so, he had transformed a cold political requirement into a deeply human story of courage, love, and hope. His legacy was not measured in treaties or laws, but in the families that existed because he had been brave, in the peace that endured because he had chosen love, in the world that had been changed because one man had decided to step forward into the unknown. And somewhere in whatever lay beyond, Gabriel and Kraska were together still, their love a bridge between worlds, their courage a beacon for all who would follow. The end.